I've been a bit under the weather over this past week. It's just COVID, don't worry about it. I say that joke all the time, but this time I think it actually was COVID. But I'm past the 5-day mark, so we're all good. I'm like a week into it. But I've been sick. When I was a kid and I got sick, mother would come and read little bedtime stories by my bed and put me to sleep. But now I live with a bunch of guys who don't know how to read, and so I had to read bedtime stories to myself. And I came across one that is a real classic favorite. I think it says a lot about today's gospel reading. The Velveteen Rabbit. Have you guys ever heard of the Velveteen Rabbit? No? Okay, you're in for a treat. And Jesus did say, unless you accept the kingdom of heaven like a child, you cannot enter it. So if you deem like a child's book is below you, maybe you should go to hell. So it's all right. I was first told about this children's book, The Velveteen Rabbit, by a woman in her 40s, like many years ago. And it was cool because she was actually making a velveteen rabbit because she was going to give a presentation to some kids in elementary school. But this woman, she was all by herself now. She was in her 40s, and she had 2 sons. They'd both gone off to college now, and unfortunately she had divorced, right? So she was just living by herself at this point. And she said to me, if I had only read this story sooner, maybe I would have looked at life and love differently, right? Because the whole story is about what does it mean to become real, which is a big question for every human being. What does it mean to live an authentic human life? And she said, when I was growing up, the message I always got that to become real means self-fulfillment. And yet everything I've come to learn in our faith and in this book taught me that to become real means self-sacrifice. I said, I wish I would have learned that a little sooner in life. Lucky for you, I get to teach you today. So the subtitle of this book is How Toys Become Real. And it's about this stuffed rabbit and his desire to become a real rabbit. So he's a stuffed animal. He's just kind of left in the corner of this room, not played with, not seen, and he sees all these other toys that are kind of moving around mechanically and whatnot and being ridden on by his boy owner. And he's just kind of forgotten on the side. And one day he meets this horse, a stuffed horse, and has like an eye popped out and its hair pulled out and all these holes in it. And he feels bad for the horse. And the horse says, don't feel bad for me. These scars that I got from my owner, the boy's uncle, these are what made me real. And so the rabbit asks him, what is real? Does it mean having things that buzz inside of you and make you move? The horse replied, real isn't how you're made, it's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real. The rabbit asked, does it hurt? The horse replied, sometimes, but when you're real, you don't mind being hurt. Does it happen all at once, like being wound up, or bit by bit? The horse replied, it doesn't happen all at once. You become. It takes a long time. That's why becoming real doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or have sharp edges, or have to be kept very carefully. Generally, by the time you're real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you're real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand. And so one night, the boy, his nanny grabs the little bunny rabbit and gives it to the boy to play with when he couldn't find his other toy. And the boy ends up falling in love with the bunny rabbit, and they spend all this time together. And at one point, though, the boy does get scarlet fever. And so the doctor sends him away and says that everything in his room has to be burnt. And so the rabbit is taken out with all his other toys and put out in the garden to be burned. And the rabbit's sitting there reflecting on his life. And at one point, he sheds a tear. And that tear falls on the ground, and a flower comes out of it, and this fairy comes from the flower. and says, I am going to grant you the gift of life because you now know what it is like to love and to be loved. You can become real. And it changes the bunny rabbit into a real living bunny rabbit. And, he runs off and he comes back a year later and the boy sees him and is reminded of that beautiful bunny that he had as a kid. The end. It's a very touching story, right? But I love this idea. I think it's an image of the resurrection for all of us, right? Because we are all there. It's a huge question. If you've seen Blade Runner, everyone's seen, is that more to your level, Blade Runner 2049? Right? It's the same question. What does it mean to become human? Right? It's the same idea. And the reason these are such big questions, whether you're a kid or whether you're adult, we're all looking for what does an authentic life look like. And if you follow the culture right now, we who hold up Hollywood, and youth and beauty and riches and success, to become real in our culture in the West means that you fulfill all of your dreams, everything that you set out, that you want to make you happy. If you make that happen, you'll live an authentic, real life. To get what you want, to force your will upon the world, to come out on top and be successful in whatever you deem that category to be, then you are real and authentic. But this stands in complete contrast to what Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who came to earth to show us the reality of what it means to be human beings made in the image of God. His image of reality is very different from that image. What Christianity teaches us is that to become real is to love and to be loved. And many people in this world never become real because we're afraid of the suffering and the pain that comes with that. We believe that to truly become real, to love, is to give ourselves, to die to ourselves. That as we lose ourselves for the sake of another, for our spouse, for our children, for our vocation, that in that very process of death, we are discovering another person on the other side, much deeper, the reality of who we were always meant to be in God. But that's why Christ says, unless you lose your life, you can never find your life. And unless the seed fall into the ground and die, it remains only a single grain. But many of us were afraid of the death process. True reality is suffering love. And I think we all know that when we see it in others, that there is nothing more beautiful than a grandmother and a grandfather looking at all the descendants before them and holding their grandchildren in their arms and all the suffering they had to go through day after day to persevere to get to that stage. There's nothing more real and beautiful than that. It was really interesting. Last night I was with a family, and there is just a beautiful big family with kids running all over the place and the mother holding her grandchildren now. And on the way back, I did something I've never done in my life. I listened to Taylor Swift. It was a really awkward thing, but someone had sent a song to me, and it was like the song of a tortured artist. But it's so interesting because here's Taylor Swift, 30-some years old, who knows if she'll ever have kids, and all she's doing in her songs is raging against the world. She has every amount of success from the externals, and yet all her music nowadays is so angry and empty because of how she deems her life. And yet looking at this family that I just came through, that no one ever sees or knows, and the joy and the beauty that was there, it was such a high contrast. That's the thing. It's like a father that wakes up and goes to provide, goes to work day after day to provide for his wife and his children. And comes home every day tired and exhausted, loves his kids, goes to sleep with his wife, wakes up, does it again. You're becoming real. in that suffering love more and more, and nobody else will ever recognize it except maybe a couple generations down. And a mother who is open to children, open to life, and every day giving herself to her husband, to her children, in silence, in solitude, in anonymity, with no one recognizing you, except maybe your children once they have their own kids and understand how hard it actually is. You're becoming real by that sacrifice. But that's not the reality that the world holds up. That's not what it means to be real and to be authentic and to have a good life in our culture today. So what Christ is really giving us is the choice in today's gospel is, how do I measure success in my life? Is it getting everything that I want and fulfilling my dreams and finding my happiness? Or is it making a sacrifice of my life to somebody else or something greater than me, beyond me? Anyone who ever says, I want to marry you because you make me happy, run away fast. Because that's going to be the rest of your life, measured by how happy do you make me. We're treating life like a Jerry Maguire film, like you complete me. No, that's not the way love works. You found your vocation when you find your cross. And you say, you're the one I want to suffer with. You can have good times with anybody. But when things get hard and I'm not happy and things are really difficult and you're not who I want you to be right now, I want to be by your side. When you truly find the person you want to spend the rest of your life with, you found your cross. Someone worth suffering with. Giving your life for. That's what a vocation is. That's what marriage is. That's what the priesthood is. And a priest once told me, once I got ordained, it's like, I made it. I was stupid enough to say those words. I made it. Because I thought that was the goal. After 10 years, all right, you'd be happy too to cross that line. But he goes, it's not about how many priests are ordained. It's about the priests that are buried. And then I found out the majority of priests who leave the priesthood leave in the first 5 years. Well, because it's not what we thought it would be. And it's true. I never thought I'd be at St. Paul's. There's a lot of sufferings that comes with those children, But at one point in my mind, I had to come to this trespass of priesthood isn't exactly what I thought. It's not this incredible gift of intimacy with Christ and prayer and adventure. It's a monotonous life. And vocations are pretty monotonous. And you get to this point where you say, well, I'm not so fulfilled right now. I'm not feeling good right now. But what is this about? What is priesthood about? It's about you. If you love me, feed my sheep. The whole point of the priesthood is to give your life as a sacrifice for the people that God brings to you. And the whole point of marriage is to make of your lives a sacrifice for your spouse and for your children. And when we lose sight of that, especially as Catholics, we become no different than the rest of the world. That's why, unfortunately, the divorce rate's the same in the Catholic Church as it is in the rest of the West. How can that be? Well, are we looking at the reality of what it means to be married, to live my life as my own personal happiness and fulfillment, or to make of my life a suffering gift of love for others? That's why Christ says in Hebrews, I think it's so encapsulated in Hebrews in that second reading. It says, for it was fitting that he for whom and through whom all things exist, in bringing many children to glory, should make the leader of their salvation perfect through what? Suffering. Christ saved us through suffering love. God could have chose any way to save us. But when he went to the cross, he wasn't just doing that so we don't have to do it, or doing that because that was a punishment of sin. What he was doing was manifesting to us, this is what salvation looks like for every one of our lives. This is the purpose of every one of your lives. Is the cross and suffering and death and that's all I got for you. God bless. No! It's like, because it leads to the resurrection. There's no greater happiness I've ever found in my life than on the other side of the greatest sufferings that I've ever encountered in my life as a priest. But we have to be willing to go through the pains of the dying to self so that we can enjoy Christ in the resurrection on the other side. And you're all an image of that resurrection for me. As your children, I guarantee all your parents here, a sign of their perseverance and their love, their fruitful love, is you. And the gift that comes through your life as their children. But do I believe that to become real, to become authentically human, and Blade Runner had the same exact conclusion at the end of that, is no greater act of man than to give your life as a sacrifice. That is the deepest human and divine wisdom that has ever been expressed in books and in movies and in Scripture. That the fulfillment of man comes through making a gift of ourselves to another. That's why, I know I'm going to get flack for this, but I'd honestly say I've never had anyone at least come to me with a valid reason for divorce. I've only been a priest for 6 years, so maybe it will happen. But 17 years people coming to me, and I've never had a single person come to me for a valid reason for divorce. Because I've never had another person come to me with the same problems in their relationship, and what one couple says, this is the reason we can't be together anymore, the other couple said, and this is where I'm going to die to myself. This is why I made vows. For better, for worse, richer, poorer, sickness, and in health, till death do us part. Those vows are very encapsulating. And what we forget, because when we get married, we get married for the good, right? The good times, the health, and the wealth, and the prosperity. But what makes us real in life is the sickness. What makes us real in life is the worst times, and the bad times, and the poverty. Because it's in those very places where I am invited not just to gaze upon Christ on the cross, or just gaze upon his sacrifice on the altar, but to join him in his mission of salvation, which is, I give my life, I suffer, I die to myself for you, for my vocation. And as hard as that is, it's also the most beautiful gift that we receive in our vocation. To make of ourselves a gift to another, even unto death. And if we truly have eyes of faith, if we have the eyes of little children before they get so scarred in the world and too smart for their own good, you come to see that that is the kingdom of heaven. That's a foretaste of all the beauty and the goodness that we receive in Christ. When we can offer our own lives in sacrifice with him for our spouse, for our children, and for our vocation.